Author Talks. I am here with Ronit Plank, author of When She Comes Back, a memoir about her childhood life, in which her mother left her and her sister, 4-year-old sister, when Ronit was only 6, to go follow an Indian guru. And so, first of all, I'd just like to say, Ronit, I know you're super busy this week with interviews and stuff. So thank you so much just for making time for Author Talks and me.
I'm so excited when you asked me to do this, and we set up the plan and made it, put it on the calendar. I was so excited. It's been above my desk, and I'm all yours. And it's a privilege, and I'm thrilled to be here. So I woke up very excited to do this today. I forgot you're in Central Time Zone. I'm on the West Coast, so it's not that early, but I'm still sort of starting my day, and I'm excited to be here.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That's terrific. And I just so appreciate that. So it's an honor to have you. And Ronit is not only a writer, but she is a teacher and has an MFA, and she has an award-winning podcast called And Then Everything Changed. So let's go back. Let's start, I guess, just with the book. So when did you know that you had to write this book?
It's funny because I've mentioned this before sometimes when people talk about writing, because those writers who knew for a long time they wanted to write, even from childhood, that they wanted to grow up and write a book, or people who knew they had a book in them, that never crossed my mind at all. And I came to writing really late. I wrote a little bit for the theater when I was acting, but I just thought, I'm not a writer, even though my sister, who is a writer, and my father, who's a writer, but my sister said, you should really write. And I didn't take it seriously. But then when I had my second child and he was about 2, I started taking fiction classes, and I never thought about writing memoir. I didn't even know much about memoir, to be truthful. I was new to literature in a way and new to writing. And then I went to get my master's in 2015, and I switched over after a semester to nonfiction, from fiction to nonfiction, trying to stay away from the memoir genre. But then my teacher, Deborah Courtney, said, this essay that you just submitted for your first round of critique is 20 pages long, and it reads like an annotated version of your entire life. Why don't you just write the memoir already? And so I started writing it in 2016, I think, but still thinking, well, does anyone need this story? This isn't so different. This isn't so special. People have far different experiences that are a lot harder. So I came into it, and then I'd say by 2017, I realized, I want to finish this, and my thesis became the core of this manuscript, and then I continued to work on it and revise it. So I would say probably in 2016, 2017, I realized, okay, this is a book.
That's interesting that you started with fiction and then switched over to nonfiction. So it sounds like it became clear that obviously you had a story to tell, and having 20 pages flow out with an essay like that.
Well, and also it's funny. So I have a short story collection coming out in the spring through Hidden River Arts, and a lot of those stories were those were my baby stories, and they were the beginning of me sort of trying to work out. Sorry, there's a dog in the background. Oh, so sorry. Okay. But it was the beginning of me working out what I was thinking about my life, because I was always in such a hurry to just move on from my life. And then I got married and I had my kids, and I thought, like I think a lot of people do, this is brand new, and I'm going to wipe the slate clean, and everything is new again, and I don't have to think about my past. But the past just kept coming back at me. In my short fiction, there are like themes of separation and wanting to belong, of course, and giving up power. In fact, I have a very long short story in there about a coercive control type of call center that was loosely based on what I know about my mom's and a job I had. And so it was kind of working itself out. And then I think by the time I switched over to nonfiction, I had written some essays about this time in my life, some sad kind of essays that had been published. And so I realized, okay, I have a lot more going on, and I want to work this out. And I learned a lot about memoir along the way. I mean, I don't know if you're a memoir reader anyway, but I had to really understand what the genre was.
I'm still learning about that too. I've had a memoir that's been in the works for way too long. It's been in kind of the thought process, I think, and working out a lot of kinks. But So I'm still learning about the memoir genre and
Yeah.
exploring that as well. But I'm definitely drawn to it as a
Yeah,
genre.
I'm super drawn to it. And I think my area of my extra interest area is something that I kind of concentrated on in my thesis in my master's program, which is these coming of age memoirs, these memoirs where kids have sort of an insecure attachment in their family. Their parent is not really parenting. And I found that those memoirs really spoke to me. And
Mm.
even now I feel really interested and involved and very close to the writers of those memoirs.
That's interesting. So would you say that you were drawn to, an MFA program? Like, what sort of drew you to that?
Well, I didn't have much of a write. I mean, I was a new writer. I was like 40 years old or 38 years old, a new writer. And I was developing some community among the classes that I took at University of Washington. So I met workshop partners when I was taking my certificate program. So I took 3 9-month long workshops and certificate programs at University of Washington, like kind of adult ed type of stuff, continuing. So I did fiction 1, fiction 2, then I did nonfiction. And then I took some classes at Hugo House in Seattle. And I loved the community. It might be the kibbutznik in me. I just really liked having people around me, just like when I used to do plays as an actor, to be in a team kind of environment, like a family environment for a time where you're all together. Like I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I was feeling a little lonesome and feeling like, what's my next move? And in fact, when I went into my master's program, I was working on a novel, which I'm picking up again now. And so I was writing alone in a coffee shop. My kids were at school. I was I felt like I didn't have any anchor. I felt like, who's holding me accountable and what's my community and who's going to read this? And so that's why I got my master's.
Yeah. And so is that something that you would recommend for other aspiring writers? Do you think that the MFA is a necessity?
I don't at all. And that's the question. I think I remember for a time when I was researching that option, there are always these articles that would come up in Writer's Digest or Poets and Writers, is an MFA necessary? Is an MFA for you? MFA issue. And it seems like something that you should have and that you should need to get ahead. But I don't think it's necessary. For me, I love being accountable. I love having sort of like the overarching structure, and I love having a teacher to tell me when I'm doing bad or good. I'm a very approval based person, which has a lot to do. I'm sure you could figure that out from my book. Like I need to know I'm good. I need like that little cookie or that pat on the back. And I think that that's part of the reason I wanted to be in the program. I did meet some great people there, people who have their own books now and people who own bookstores and things like that. But the biggest community I got from, in the writing community has really been how I met you and and we can talk about that too. I want to answer your question. I don't think the MFA is necessary. I think it's really awesome in a way, but sometimes I feel a little sheepish when I add it to my bio. Like, I don't mean to be thumbing my nose at people who don't have an MFA. I don't think you need it, but eventually my teaching experience, teaching kids and teaching a little bit of writing to adults, I want to use that to teach other courses. And I think the master's will be helpful there. It's like another little notch to say, you should definitely hire me as a teacher.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that you make, some great points there about, community and feedback, and that it's kind of like you can only sort of write and create for so long in solitude before you get to a point where you're like, okay, let me share that. Let me bounce this off of someone else. Let me get some reader feedback. And
yes, I met a writer that I know, again, through Instagram. It sounds funny. If anyone's not involved on Facebook or Instagram, it sounds goofy, but I really have met the nicest people, the nicest writers and readers. I was able to launch my book with so many people supporting me and posting for me and talking about my book because of that. And it just happened this year. But one of the writers I met, she's a young adult historical novel writer. Her name is Jamie McGillen. And we just got together in person south of where I live in Seattle. And she was saying, I'm not in a creative mode right now. Right now, my third book is off at the developmental editor and the proofreader, and I'm doing the marketing right now. So she's like, right now I'm coming off of a heavy marketing time, but I was in a creative time. And I think that was helpful for me, because sometimes I miss the obvious. And I think right now I've been in the marketing time. And so I shouldn't be so angry with myself or frustrated when I haven't gotten a lot of generative work out there, because I have all these other projects I'm working on. But this has been since May, this promotion. And even to look now in August to have had such a busy week of promotion and appearances has been pretty amazing. And I should just remember that's what this time is for. And now the kids are going back to school, knock wood, in 3 weeks, and
Mhm.
I will be writing.
Sure, sure. Well, and I think that's an important piece too, is like you said, just recognizing that there are different seasons, not only in your life, but in your writing, life as well. And so understanding like, okay, so this was more the creative and the writing and the community stage, and now I'm more in the publishing stage and then the
Yeah.
marketing stage, and giving yourself space for those things to not feel like, oh, now I need to hurry up and go back and create, when it's like, no, like now like I've birthed this, but I want to give it time, to grow and share
Yeah,
it.
and it's important too, because sometimes, I can be prone to extreme thinking, and I can think, I'm not a writer anymore. I don't know. I have no ideas. What am I going to do? Like, am I a writer? But, it's just, that's just my little frenetic brain, and I have to kind of turn it off and relax.
Well, I would say you're clearly a writer. It's such a beautiful book, and
Oh, thank you.
it's I was saying before we hopped on live, just that I felt like I could feel Ronit's heartache, just in recounting her experiences when I was reading the book. And I think that's such a powerful and valuable thing as a writer, when you can share your experiences in such a way that, you make someone else feel what you were feeling at the time.
Yeah, it's not something, I don't come out. I don't know how I approach it, like how much consciousness there is to saying, I really want the reader to feel this, but I think I'm trying to create it in a way that puts me there. And I know it's important on a sensory level. And I want some, I guess I like reading stuff like that. Like, I realize I get really drawn to books and work that, and movies too, where there's a strong emotional current. I mean, for me, scenery and place and setting is nice, but I will happily, I mean, when I'm reading, happily skip over paragraphs of that to get to an architecture. Like, I don't need all that. I want the relationship. And so for me to get involved in a book right away and not have to slog through pages and pages to get to the meat, I want the relationship. And so for me too, and I don't know if some of it comes from acting or from like the emotional work I've done with, new parents and stuff as a group leader, I just want to feel. And so that's why I'm trying to get the reader right away there, and to try to like perhaps put like those glasses on your face as a reader to sort of see through my lens, what it was like. Because to me, I think then I've done my job, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think you state things and share things in such a way that I think it really takes us into your mindset as a girl, going through this and just saying, all the feelings that you share about, wondering where your mother is, wondering why she's, not there with you, and being thankful for your father and that relationship. But one relationship doesn't replace,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, there's that idea too. And I think, I feel also that the story was originally about my mom, but I remember an earlier editor, Mike Magnuson, who has a couple of books out, and he was a teacher at Pacific. He said, but your father, where is he? All we know is that he like raised you, but we don't have any information about him. And so I had to go back, and it was funny, right? Because there it is, something I know, but the reader is not going to know unless I explain it better, right? So I had to go back and add those scenes and those feelings and those kinds of senses of interaction, so people could feel better about what he was like beyond my dad raised me, and then the surprise for me was how I understood our family. And what happened to us was that, yes, my mom left. That's like, in a sense, the top story. But the bottom story, or the second layer under there, was what I lost with my father, which I always knew in sort of like just my bones that, our relationship had gone kind of sideways. But the part I really didn't want to write about in the book was the discomfort I felt as I got to adolescence, and I was this sort of like female force in the house. And for me, always talking about my mom was easy. My mom left. So, I write that in the book that I could easily throw that out there. I wasn't shy about that because I knew it gave me some street cred. But the part, but the part that, like funny name, check, left-handed, check. I was born in Israel, check. My mom followed a guru, check. Like I got it all dialed in to be different. But the part I didn't want to talk about was, geez, I felt really uncomfortable with my father and I had to push him away in order to like continue the relationship. And that was not fun to write. Like if there was any part of the book I didn't want to address, it was that. But really the sacrifice of a writer, I think if you sacrifice as a writer or as a person, whenever you move toward vulnerability, there's always a gift that comes from it. And so hopefully that added something to the reader experience. And it also added to my understanding of my family.
Well, I definitely picked up on that, obviously, because that's a really clear, theme that emerges, in the middle toward the end of the book is just as Ronit mentions that she, as a teenager, suddenly, I know that, can you talk a little bit about the part with your grandmother in the book where she,
when she told me, like, don't do that around your father. So I'm amazed by the relationships a lot of people have with their grandparents, because growing up, one lived in Florida. I lived in Queens at the time. One of our grandparents lived in Brooklyn. We never saw him. Not involved. My mom's side of the family, not really involved, except for my aunt. Then my dad's mom had moved to California years ago with her new husband, for her health. And we just never saw her. She wasn't in good health enough to really jet around, but we saw her a couple of times because we didn't have money for vacation either. We weren't a family who was like, where are we going this spring? Never.
Right.
And then, my other grandparent that was alive was my dad's dad, and he lived in Florida, and he wasn't exactly safe to be around unattended either, because he had had some, sexual abuse of children in his past. So it was really fun in my family. No, I'm kidding. But so,
you share that, like you share it subtly, but it's definitely there.
Yes,
about your grandfather.
Yes, I changed all the names in my book, including like everyone, even my favorite teacher, because I just decided there's no reason to start talking about people's names. I'm trying to give you the sense of the story. I don't need to bring in their life necessarily. But with my grandmother on a vacation, we went in the summer, I believe, to San Diego. I was there in her apartment with my sister and my dad. And at one point, no one was in the room but me and my grandma. And I showed her bridge pose in yoga and went up to do wheel pose, which is when, your hands and your feet you're on the floor and they're on the ground, and then you push up your body like an arch. And I showed her how high I could go because I was really limber. And she didn't really say anything. I went back down on the rug. I rested. I said, isn't that good? Like, isn't that great? And because I always needed approval. And she just looked at me and she was like, you shouldn't do that around your father. And I remember thinking, what? I was 11, and I remember thinking, what? Like, we're fine. I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, why would you do that to me as a little girl at 11 years old? I'm showing you what my body can do. And you just basically told me I shouldn't do that. And definitely not, it's not safe to do around my dad. So that was one of the first times when I realized that maybe the tiniest shadow of a thought I was having wasn't just me, that maybe there was a danger ahead.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that those kinds of comments too it's like you said, even though maybe it's meant in a way to be, I don't know, helpful or enlightening or protective or something, it really does, it kind of pops you right out of that childhood world and make you go, wait a minute, like why? And like,
exactly.
Dad, why should I have to feel awkward about, and like you said, at 11, being able to, do this pose, with my body, and why should he feel uncomfortable about that?
And you're totally right about getting popped out of your childhood world. I mean, that's exactly how I would explain that. And then on that same vacation, and I write about this, I braided my hair into 2 pigtail braids when we went to some water park. And it was almost like I decided, I'm a little girl and I'm going to let the world see how young I am, because I normally had my hair down. I wanted to be older, but I basically did 2 little pigtails that day with like braids. And I decided, I'm little because I needed the world and maybe me and maybe my father to understand, like, I'm still little, even though normally I didn't want to be little.
Well, and you also write about, him placing a lot of responsibility on you as far as cooking and helping take care of your sister and things like that. And so when did was it also at that point that you kind of started to realize that maybe he was sort of expecting a bit much of you in that situation, or that he was expecting almost like you're his daughter, but he's also kind of expecting more partnership, role?
Well, I wanted to be, it's complicated, and I'm sure a therapist could do a better job figuring it out for me. But I mean, I'm pretty introspective about this stuff, and I don't mind talking about it. I think that I never realized it was wrong. And again, he always tells, me and my sister, if we ever talk about this, that he thought I wanted to do these things, that he thought I liked it because I was precocious and I wanted, a place in the family, in the world. And I don't know how much had to do with feeling insecure and I needed to earn my keep. I don't know. With one parent gone and you have only one, I mean, what are the risks to you as a child if you really anger that parent or disappoint that parent that remains? I mean, I don't know. And inside, maybe I did have that feeling, oh, my father had left first, so this is not a secure attachment either, even though my overarching feeling about my father is that it was very secure. So I don't think I got to a stage at 11 or 12 where I thought, he wants me to bring his coffee, or he wants me to cook. I mean, I still thought it was my job. And it was kind of like, eventually I passed the coffee duties in the morning to my sister. I was like, I can't do this anymore because it was too awkward for me to bring him coffee in bed. I just didn't want to do that. But I never thought I'm not supposed to be making dinner, because who else was going to make dinner? Right. I mean, it wasn't like my father was a great cook or that he had the time. It wasn't even on the table that my father would make dinner. But I'm not saying that in a way to blame him and to say, gosh, what a terrible father. It just was not the way we were working as a family. And so even when I turned, let me think, even when I turned even older before he got remarried, though I was making dinner, I wasn't happy about it. So I started to rebel in those little ways where I was sullen and I was removed, and I tried not to show any joy around my father. And I didn't have any joy really, but I didn't want to have a lot of energy around him that would make him feel that I wanted him to come closer and, get closer to me emotionally or physically. It was like, you know, so I had that for a long time in my life, that feeling.
Well, and I think it is, it does feel uncomfortable in the book when you're reading that section about that. It's essentially that, your father had been more of a constant in your life, and that he was the one who, was there for you and your sister, and that you had enjoyed being close to him and, wearing his clothes and, going out with for, special dates, special time with him, and things like that. And so then as you get a little older, and you're entering that teenage phase, then, and like you said, that everyone kind of goes through that to a certain extent, where you suddenly realize, oh, like this is kind of taking on different connotations now, and maybe I need to be a little more guarded about that. And like you said, not bringing him the coffee and not wearing his clothes. But I also think you describe well, in the book, your personality, as far as, that whenever you played with your sister, you were always in the leadership role. If you were the queen, she was the peasant. If you were the mom, she was the kid, and, all those things. So, but again, you're the oldest child, so I'm sure it's natural, for you to fall into those.
Well, and also the control thing. And, I don't know, had I been a different kind of kid, it's also nature versus nurture. And this is how I came into the world, this slightly bossy, self-actualized for many years, expressive kid. And that happened a lot of the reason, I think, was because of the kibbutz and the security I had there. And so I don't know, had I been a different kind of kid, if I would have said, I don't want to cook, or I'm not doing that. Or maybe if I had a different kind of behavior and I wasn't as a motivated person, I would have been like, who's going to make dinner? If I hadn't solved the problem, someone else would have had to solve the problem. But I think my worth depended so much on what I could do, what I could give people, and it took me a really, really, really long time to stop doing that. And I still have those, are they mad at me moments, or maybe I need to do more moments, So I think that it takes a long time to break those habits where you realize, oh, I'm okay this way. I can be who I am. I don't have to earn my keep as a human being in the world.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about the part of the book where you write about your parents and their, their time on the kibbutz and when you're younger, and how were you able to kind of find out those stories? Like, did you talk to them about
Yeah.
that to be able to figure out the backstory there? Because again, that was a pretty explosive, potentially issue there that you uncover.
Yeah. Well, so, it's so funny. I don't know if people have this experience when you start asking parents and family things, different parts of the story come out and things you had no idea occurred start to come to the surface and you're like, what? I had no idea. So the things that I did know probably a decade or two ago were that my father cheated, maybe more than that. My father cheated on my mom when we were on the kibbutz, that he was a flirt. I knew that. Um, and I knew about the kibbutz because I grew up with these stories. I knew what kind of a character, quote, character I was. I saw pictures growing up. My father had so many photo albums that I got to just pour over those photos my whole life. It was like part of our story, but also like an old time, place that I could never get back to. So we had lots of albums and photos, and I knew the stories. But to write the book, that was another area where I think I knew I had to go back in time to sort of give the reader the foundation of how I began my life, because I think the stuff that happened later is tricky, but I think it's even more of a challenge if you've grown up thinking everything is okay, feeling for the first 4 years of your life, which sounds really young, but for the first 4 years of your life, oh, everyone here knows me. I know them on the kibbutz. My food is exactly where it's supposed to be. My parents are always there. And there's kids to play with at all times. Everything is here. And then to go to that stark contrast of a quiet, dark, rainy city where your parents who have never taken care of you full time are now in charge and they have no community around them. I mean, it was such a shock for everyone. So I asked them about it. I sat with my father, I sat with my mother, and we talked about it. I took notes.
Separately or together?
Both,
Both,
because
okay.
it's no joke that every Friday night, and I realize I'm really lucky to have them in my life. We had dinner last night they came over, my mom cooked with me, and my dad was over, my kids were here, my husband and one of my kids' friends. We had Shabbat dinner, and there we were. I mean, actually, I think last night we finally broke our pattern. We didn't talk about the kibbutz because I actually have to call them and tell them we won the award, because every Friday night for the past however many years they bring the kibbutz up. My dad talks about the kibbutz because I think it was one of the best times of his life, but then my mom will roll her eyes and be like, he hated the kibbutz. So I talked to both of them, knowing there are some difficult areas that we will not discuss, like the affair that never gets talked about together. My father doesn't talk about the affair at all, or that at all. My mom will tell me about that. And so I get each of them separate and together, and you push play on my phone, and I record. And then I had all that I needed for the story. So they were very forthcoming. They were happy to help me with that.
I wonder how rare that is, because I don't know that a lot of people would necessarily want, kind of their family's dirty laundry kind of hung out there.
No. It's not, I don't mean to say it was super simple, because a lot of people asked me what it was like when your parents and your family read the manuscript and what they thought. And the basic, okay, so first, when I switched from fiction to nonfiction in my master's program and decided to do memoir, my mom, when I told her I was switching to memoir, she was sort of like, oh,
like, oh no,
there's probably only one story I'm going to be telling. And so I think she was a little nervous, and she'd read some of the earlier essays, and my father had disagreed with some of the earlier essays. There's one that I depict the scene in, because I was writing all these little pieces before the memoir, but my sister corroborated these things. She said, no, that happened. So I knew I wasn't just making this stuff up. So my sister said it was a little odd to read about herself in a book. I don't think that's a favorite feeling for anyone. But she added a couple things I'd forgotten. and I added them back to the book. My father gave me 9 pages of single-spaced notes, including problems he had with the manuscript. He fixed some of my Hebrew and he helped me with my timeline, but he also went to bat for himself a couple of times. That couldn't have happened then. That wasn't the weather then. So there's no way we had that fight then. There's no way I would have done that then. But again, I had my sister to help me with those memories. And so I was like, Dad. And here's an interesting thing too. Like, I talk about how my clothes didn't fit that well. I was wearing hand-me-downs and things were tight and I couldn't fit them around my waist and so uncomfortable. And he said to me, well, why didn't you tell me, you make it sound like a cross between Oliver Twist and Cinderella. I was like, Dad, I was like, oh my God, we're going to fight about this. I said, I didn't mean it was your fault. I meant, like, what kid is going to go, no, I shouldn't say that. I was not the kind of kid in my shame about my size that was going to go tell my father, guess what? I can't fit into these pretty skirts from your girlfriend's daughters. I made them work. And so I like changed a little bit in the book to say my father had no idea, right? Mm-hmm. And because I didn't want to seem like I was blaming him. And then my mom was pretty happy with the end result. I mean, she would have been happier if I stuck with fiction. but she was like, compared to the way our relationship had been, the anger, the kind of irritation, and the way I could have written the book, she was actually pretty pleased with what happened and how I portrayed her story. So that was a really nice surprise.
So while I have the cover image pulled up for a minute, can we talk a little about that? I didn't realize what that was until a little while ago. I think I thought it was more like stones or pebbles. And then when I looked closely, I was like, oh, and I was like, that's a really neat connection.
Yeah. So actually the first cover was not this cover, but then about 4 months before the book came out, we realized, we need a different cover. And so we approached John Gray, who is a cover artist for Jonathan Safran Foer and a whole bunch, Zadie Smith, and he's out of the UK and he does beautiful work. And he was able to take my book on in a pinch, like almost no time. Mm-hmm. And we hashed out some ideas. And so these are the mala beads that the sannyasins or followers of Bhagwan would wear. They'd wear black mala beads with a picture of Bhagwan at the end, dangling on the end. And so my mom wore this for several years. And when she first came back, the first time she left, she was wearing this necklace. And so I love the way he did this, but I also really appreciate the texture of the orange, almost like fabric, almost like the sunset colors the sannyasins wore. Sure. And also almost a little like the softness of a safety in childhood, a soft, tactile, something plush, and then the beads on top. And so I was really pleased with this. And, I think he achieved a lot in it. I mean, I really am happy with it. It's a very big improvement from the direction we had earlier that I helped create. This is a lot better.
Yeah. As someone who's studying covers and what makes a good cover, what made you realize that you needed a different cover?
Well, I was working with a couple of publicists, a publicist for just a short time. We hired them last minute too. I hired them. I was like, well, this is my only childhood memoir. Let me do this, because that's really expensive. I mean, publicists are so expensive, but it was 4 months until the launch. And I was like, okay. And so they said, we need to talk about the cover. And the other cover was very on the nose. It was a picture of me and my mom, the one that's on the back of this book. Mm-hmm. And it was like a map of India and the States. And it was like a little line that kind of connected them, which was fine. But the cover itself was a very kind of ivory color. There wasn't anything we created it, me and my publisher together. It was our idea. It did its job, right? But then they were like, you're a debut author, and this is not a big press, but we feel like they love the book, and they were like, we really think you need a better cover. And so I sprung for the John Gray cover. And then that's when my mom was like, it was supposed to be a small book with this little cover, and now it's orange and it's this big book. And it's like, she was so funny about it. But, I think I don't know much about the art of covers. I have a cover designer working on my short story collection right now, and I'm eager to see what he'll bring back after reading it. But I know there has to be sort of this, I feel like the best covers, you're like, oh, or you're like, what's going on here? Not as on the nose perhaps, or
Yeah.
they're just beautiful. Like I'm reading Somebody's Daughter right now by Ashley C. Ford, and
Oh,
I have
sure.
to study it more carefully, but it's very bright and vivid. And that alone is striking, but I'm not Zadie Smith and I'm not Jonathan Safran Foer. So it was kind of funny in a way that I went with this giant title book, but I'm pleased with it.
Yeah. Well, and of course, just the image of the mala necklace being broken too, and again, there's a great symbolism there as far as eventually your mother not being involved with it and
Yes.
coming back into your life. And
Yeah, like I think even if you didn't know, you'd be like, I don't know what those are, but I can
and
see
the
them.
and the like kind of the abandonment and the connections and the broken and yet
Yeah, I mean, I
there's
couldn't
so
be.
many things. That's how it made me feel when
Well,
I
I'm
did
so
I
glad. I
had the
mean,
oh moment too of the oh, that's
oh,
what it is. Because I really thought because again I've been looking at this and trying to figure out, especially for memoirs, what makes a good cover. And like you said, the way that you were going initially sounds more like other memoirs that I've seen sometimes where it is the old photo. It's an
yeah,
old
which is fine.
photo.
I mean, the photo was amazing, but I have to say, in all the things that I've been doing for my book, all the promotion and the interviews, Jane, you're the first person to spend time on the cover. And it's really lovely that you want to talk about it and that you got that out of it, because I do. And even talking to you right now, I realized, right, it's also really for the first time, I was like, oh, it's also like when she leaves Bhagwan. Like there's just a couple of meanings to the mala breaking, and you just helped me see that. So that's what I think is good with any piece of art or creative anything, is when you can think about it later and be like, oh, that to me is a really good sign.
Yeah, and I do think it's effective, and it's again like I just think there's so much symbolism there that's so rich, and it is intriguing. I just was working on some potential covers for my project, and seeing that same thing, that sometimes the on the nose,
Yeah.
it's not intriguing enough. It's like, oh, you could just look at that and go, well, yeah, that's what it is. Like, okay,
Yeah.
it's a story about this woman and her mom. Whereas when you see this and it's a bit more symbolic, and that it fits into the memoir genre of maybe being a little bit more abstract with the imagery. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really
I mean, I think about like Blow Your House Down by Gina Frangello, which has a beautiful, striking cover. And I also think of the more subtle, but also slightly enigmatic cover for Negative Space by Lily Danziger. I mean, we could go on and on. I mean, some covers are exactly, what you would imagine if you say the title, but some just have something else going on and you want to open them and figure out, what is this? What is going on here?
So when would you say that you first started, talking with your family, with your parents about sort of trying to, like you say, piece this all together? So you were writing the fiction stories that had the, kind of the underlying themes, some of those in your life, and then this, your personal story started to kind of bleed through. So how did you begin that discussion with them, and how long ago was that, or how
Well,
long
I
did
think
you?
I think I probably worked on my own for a while. I wanted to make sure I had something I was really going to do. And then, there were a couple of developmental edits with different editors I hired, people who I knew from my writing community or my master's program. And Susan DeFreitas really helped me a lot. Jason Allen helped me a lot. And a woman named Jessica Lipnick really helped me a lot. They all offered something, I mean, many things, but they all gave me something else that I really worked on, which I can go into if we have time. But I think when I really went to town was when I realized I had to spend more time on the kibbutz, that I had to really figure out like who my father was and offer some more scenes with my mother, and understand why we did these things. That's when I started to talk to them. And so I probably was having conversations with them in 2018, because I did everything I could on my own first. And then I probably started talking to them more seriously about the timeline and things in 2018. And then I would imagine, I think I had that epilogue conversation with my mom. It must have been the end of 2018 or 2019, because that was truly like the last thing I added. And that was a surprise. It was like a gift. I had no idea what was going to happen. And then I felt I needed to include it in the book.
Yeah, I feel like was it December 2019? I feel like maybe that was what
It
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 said.
may have been. Yeah. I mean, I probably wrote that in the book. I could like open the book now, but yeah. And I was just like, what is happening? We're talking about this and she's not running away and I'm sitting here patiently. And it was just, she let me record it. I said, can I record this? Thanks. I just pushed record. And I mean, like anybody else would be like, would you please stop recording our conversation? But my mom was like, okay. Yeah, I mean, you said this before, and I don't think I spent enough time answering this. I am very lucky. I have something unusual with my parents. I mean, they drive me crazy. I drive them crazy. I have a reputation in my family for being a pain in the ass. I'm the nudnik, which is Yiddish for pain in the ass. Like I'm the one who's pushy. Definitely, I'm the older sister pushy. But they also, they get a kick out of me in a way, and they also, so I'm very lucky that they talk. I'm lucky that, my son's bar mitzvah is coming up and they're both going to be there and we're rehearsing it together. And, I'm lucky that they joke about these things together, and my mom gets a little annoyed with him, but they are here in my life, and that is a gift. And someone asked when I was on A Mighty Blaze the other day, how would it have changed if my parents had passed away? How would my orientation to getting the book out, would I not have gotten it out had they been gone? And I said, no, I would have. I definitely would have. And I might have been less accountable. Actually, it would be very tempting to tell the story differently if the people are gone. But I feel like this held me accountable, and I have children who are reading about their grandparents, and I wanted to approach it with integrity.
Yeah, and I think you definitely succeeded in that. And I think that you share, I think you have a good balance of perspectives, that obviously the book is a lot from your perspective because it's your story, but then I think you also present them in a very real, human, dignified way that shows
I'm so glad to hear that.
They're humans with their own issues and their own strengths and weaknesses. And I love the part toward the end of the book where you talk about that, the realization that you had that that your mother's leaving didn't have to do with you, that it had to do with her. And
yeah. I mean, I was a late bloomer on that information. I mean, it really took a long time. I mean, most people who have a secure attachment with their family would probably know, well, obviously, like they love me and nothing is really my fault. But if you grow up with an insecure attachment, whether your parent suffers from mental illness or they leave or they're violent or whatever it is, addiction, you could very easily fall into this idea that if you were different, they would be different. But, and I mentioned this too, and this was a revelation for me once 10 years ago. This idea that I had to believe subconsciously that I could control or I had something to do with it. Because if I knew back then when I was little that my behavior had nothing to do with my mom and I couldn't draw her closer to me no matter what I did, it would have been just shattering. So I think I had to feed myself this idea that I had more control than I did.
wow, that's an interesting perspective, that it was almost like a self-protection for you.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
So did you grow up hearing stories, from each of your parents about the other one and about kind of, the controversies and things like that? Was that information that you knew growing up, or you didn't know until later?
No, I don't really think so. Like my father protected us. Okay, my father wouldn't really talk about my mom, and he had a lot of anger about my mom, and also he was really intent on making our life together fine, and we didn't talk about hard things, as I mentioned in the book. My family, we did not talk about, we never did that thing where, oh, you're having a bad day, yeah, I'm thinking about my past, or I'm thinking about this conversation I had and it's really bothering me and I'm feeling sad. And we just didn't do that. Or that's why a lot of times if people weren't communicating, my mom was quiet or distracted, I'd just assume, in a very narcissistic way, I guess, she hates me. But really what was going on is she was having a life, right? And she wasn't communicating. But I try really hard with my kids to be like, I'm kind of in a grouchy mood today. I'm having a hard time. But so, gosh, what was the question, Jane? Something about,
just, I wondered, like as far as, especially with like the affair and,
oh yeah.
That if my dad knew about that stuff growing up, or if you didn't know until.
Not at all. And my father, even when news came in about Bhagwan and we knew Bhagwan was, in Oregon and that's where my mom was, we did not talk about it. And he still says he didn't talk about it because he didn't want to scare us. And he was concerned about what was going to happen. My mom didn't talk about my father at all. I think they really had like a detente. They were just like, we're divorced and we're not going to really, it was like time with mom, time with dad. That was it.
Mhm.
And that went on for a really, really long time. I think that may be the truth for a lot of people because until you're an adult, you probably don't, really get to talk to your parents like people, like what are they really about?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you said, you definitely have had a special and rare relationship with each of them, that because again, I think that a lot of families would tend to probably freak out if you tell them, so I'm writing a memoir about my childhood, and like you said, and your mom obviously knowing like, well, clearly this is going to involve my leaving to go follow this guru, and
Yeah.
your dad raising you and all of the things that you experienced. And again, I think not only is that a really brave thing of you to do, but it's also, it's really uniquely supportive, I think, of them to not be threatened by
Yep.
that and not be hurt by that and not be, I had seen, I think, an article or a blog post that you had written about sharing, your memoir with your family before it came out and you advocating for that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, my mom and I, we just didn't really talk too much about it. I knew she was a little tense, but I think it ended up being okay. In fact, she tried to avoid articles and appearances that I was talking about. She really didn't want to know anything about it. But then she would end up reading them and they get irritated if the reviewer didn't ask a question about her or like, why didn't you say that I was there? Whatever. Like she just got too entangled. And then she didn't watch my Seattle town hall event. She just couldn't do it. But then when I was on NPR in Seattle, she did listen. She's like, I'm going to listen. And I said, oh no, because I was like nervous to know that she was listening. But then she said, you did great. It was, I love the way you answered those questions. And so she became less afraid of it, I think. My father, yes, my father was concerned about his reputation. And I think he was worried about what his grandchildren would think about him. He's got 4, and he was worried that he would maybe look like a monster or something. And he was worried people would get the impression that he was inappropriate in a way that was a lot more injurious. But, I was like, I tried to like, nothing physical ever happened with me and my father at all. It was really just the vibe, the vibe.
Mhm.
And, he seemed to have gotten over it, or we don't talk about it. He's very, very, supportive. He'll send me articles about memoir. He'll tell me how proud he is. We don't talk about it all the time, but he's a very supportive dad. His memoir is in progress right now. So, he's taking his
Right.
old short stories that he wrote while he was on the kibbutz and prefacing them all. So, he tends to romanticize things a little bit. I think we have a different sense of like writing. Like I try not to romanticize things too much. And I think he has like a lot of nostalgia that filters in through his recollections. So that kind of irks me. But, we're different people. So, yeah.
Right. So were they like, did they actually read the entire
Yeah,
manuscript, or
they
did you
did.
just share? Okay, they
No,
did.
they did because
Wow.
my mom was relieved, and my dad gave me all those notes. And I mean, I had to, that was probably what you're talking about in that question. I did have to we had a little bit of an argument in front of a cafe. We were sitting at a cafe to meet and talk about the notes, which I did not want to do. His notes to me, 9 pages of them. And I was like, oh my God, like he's like critiquing my book and he's giving me notes about how to fix it. And he's telling me my timeline's wrong and he doesn't want this part in it. And eventually I said, Dad, I didn't have any agency when I was a kid. And I feel like you're taking my agency away by telling me how I can tell my story right now. And that was the only time where we kind of got really heated. And the guy in the wine shop next to the cafe was doing tastings. I'm like gesticulating. I'm like, and my dad is like, and he can't hear us, but he brings out a sample of wine for each of us. He's like, here you go. And I was like, he must think we're nutty, because my dad and I like, we're the only one, like, he's the only one who I like fight with like that or get irritated because I think we just know each other so well. I hurt his feelings way too easily and I get irritated with him way too easily. So, he raised me. So I just have my finger on the button there.
Yeah. I Again, I think that's a really interesting perspective, though, just that you were able to and wanted to share that manuscript with them beforehand. And
Yeah, no, I
kind of
wrote an article about that. I did write an
like,
article for Writer's Digest. I don't know if you're talking about that too,
yes,
about how to approach your friends and family about this. And there's a lot of different, for those of you who are memoir readers or memoir writers, there's a lot of different opinions about this. And some of the memoirists I talked to thought, forget it. They have nothing to do with whether or not I'm going to tell my story a certain way. No one gets to read this before I put it in the world. Like, not at all. This is my story. That whole idea, whoever said it, was it Anne Lamont? I don't know. If people wanted to, was it? If
yep,
people wanted you to write well about them, they should have treated you better. But
mhm,
I was like, I know I have to show this to them because I don't want to, like, surprise them. I don't want to catch them unawares. Like, I'm putting this into the world for anyone to read. Anyone in the world can read this. So why wouldn't I show it to my family first? But again, if I had a very difficult relationship with my family, if we were at odds and we were completely estranged, I would give them a heads up, but I wouldn't maybe feel so accountable.
mhm,
Yeah. And I'm not by any means, I try really hard not to be prescriptive. I try to like weigh that my articles are more about like that you could do this or you could do this. I'm not like, you better do this.
mhm,
Everyone has to find their own way.
right. For other writers who might have similar concerns, and maybe it's not close relationships, maybe it's other people's family or other relationships that do you have any thoughts on that, as far as if how do you potentially give someone a polite heads up but not give them license to either
Yeah.
shut you down or completely edit your work beyond all
Right.
recognition of what actually happened?
Right. Well, you could just be like, it's already at one of my friends. Well, first of all, one of my friends waited till her parents passed to write her book, and her siblings don't really want to talk about it. So I think she's just giving them a heads up. One of my friends says she will only ever show them the book when it's already at the printers. Like, this is coming out. This is it. Like, this is already done. We're not changing anything. I approached it so differently because I was like, please tell me if I messed anything up here. Because I was scared that memory is really fallible, and I was worried I got things wrong, so I double checked with them because, your memory, who knows, right? But the thing about memoir is it's not just what happened, it's what you remember happening and what you make of it. And so even if my sister and I might have remembered something differently, it doesn't mean that my experience is not true or valid. So I think everyone has to follow their own heart. But one good way to do it is to say, if someone were writing about me, would I want the chance to read this first? How would I feel? I mean, I always approach it with like, well, how would I feel if the situation were reversed? And that should maybe be your compass.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, and I also appreciated that you mentioned about, changing all of the names in the book too, just because, and I think it sounds like you're saying that helps keep the focus on more, the relationship, and not people trying to figure out who
Yeah.
an individual person is or was.
Yeah, I mean, the world is so connected that if someone really wants to figure things out, they will. But there's no real reason. It's better to just, in my opinion, like even the woman who took my mom's money, who I named Karma in the book, she
Which is
had a name. Yeah, well, she had a name that was even just as, I mean, I was so happy to have a name. I had another name that was, her real name was ridiculous because it was also a very, like contrasting name to what she did. And I was like, I kind of want to leave her name because she was so creepy, but I didn't, because I thought, why get into it? Like, why have some other sannyasin read it and be like, I knew her too, and then have her write to me and say, why? Like, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I don't want that kind of drama. A friend of mine has a book coming out shortly, and she just got served with papers from an attorney. And
I'm aware of that situation, and
yeah, and she's
she's a
like,
future guest on this show too.
yes, oh great, yeah, she's
Yeah.
lovely. And she changed the names in her book too. I mean, we're not fools. Like, we're not going to go in like court trouble, right? But why should you not tell your story because you're afraid of how people will react? I mean, that's the biggest guide for me. Like, you have a right to tell your story, but I do think a memoirist should be careful not to point fingers and not to be villainizing. I have I have a real interest in that too, and have like working on a panel for that and teaching about how not to demonize the people who hurt you in your life, because it doesn't offer a well-rounded view for the reader. It's best to show them, in action and in scene, so people can make up their own mind about it.
Right. Right. And again, I think just going back to that human factor that, even if someone, may have, made some really bad mistakes or some really bad choices, they also have some good points and some strengths as well, just as we all do.
Yeah. I mean, very few people are all evil. I mean, that's
Right.
even evil, even like enemies and villains in movies have, usually, if it's a good movie, have some complexity.
Right. And you learn that that origin story.
Which makes it richer because you feel for them more, right? So,
right.
What am I going to say? Like, my mom left me and she sucks. Like, I mean, my mom had a hard time growing up. She didn't have any compass for, having a mom her mom never hugged her. Her mom never told her she loved her. She criticized her weight. She was terrible to her. And so then you have this woman who, and actually none of my mom's siblings ended up having good relationships, none of them. Mm-hmm. It's like in my family to not have them. And so the fact that I'm married and made it through some of the hardest times as a family, and we're together and we have a good relationship, is like great. It's wild that it happened, because I should not be married. I should be divorced. I shouldn't know how to do this, because I had a really hard time with it, really hard time, until I did some serious work on myself.
Well, speaking of the work on yourself, so what sort of recommendations do you have as far as sort of that intergenerational healing?
Right.
That, again, that you reveal that sort of toward the end of the book, that again, that your mom had such a terrible relationship with her mom, and again, how those patterns can continue generationally. So sort of what recommendations do you have for people as far as, being able to look at those things and work through them?
Yeah, I think that's really hard. I mean, I had a combination of therapists over the years, and I had a real crisis of, we had a health crisis in my family, and then we had a relationship crisis in my family. But I think that, first of all, when it comes to a health crisis in your family, you have to do your best to make the person better and to help. And so that kind of brought me to my knees a little bit and made me more vulnerable. It made me a less confident person and a more helpless person. But that also showed me, what I had to do and why vulnerability was important. And then in order to shed my armor, I had to shed my armor and all the stuff I had done my whole life. I mean, I'm a New Yorker, I'm a kibbutznik. I, always believed I could take care of everything. I was like very quick and fast paced. I live on the West Coast now. I've been on the West Coast for 20 years, which helped. And, I have a partner. My husband is willing to do the hard work and look at ourselves, and we call each other on our stuff all the time. I mean, it's like a combination of knowing that you have a right to live and be the way you are, and that you are fine the way you are. But that doesn't mean that you don't have work to do. You're not a bad person. You're not a person who deserves bad things in your life. You deserve good things in your life, and you, by the fact that you're alive, like the merit of your existence, you're good enough, right? But you also, I think, if you want to grow, have to be willing to face the things you do that, are your fault. Like, I think I thought that just because I was a victim of my childhood, that I was the good guy all the time. But none of us are the good guy all the time. Right. Like, we're not. Like, it's more complicated than that. So you have to hold yourself accountable. You have to know that you're okay the way you are, but hold yourself accountable and always be growing, I think.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. Always keep growing and just be willing to look at what your flaws are and try to keep working on them. I think that's all any of us can do, really.
And yeah, nothing's perfect. I mean, nothing is perfect. It's a fantasy. That's part of the reason these coercive religions are, really dangerous, because they're selling people this idea of complete happiness and, maybe no accountability, and somebody else will think for them and guide the way. But no one really knows what they're doing. I mean, that's the secret. Some people just pretend better, I think.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I'm really glad that you brought up, we've talked a lot about you and your parents, but we haven't really talked as much about the cult guru issue and all the things with that. So what do you think it was that really pulled your mother into following this cult guru?
Well, I think after having a really hard childhood and a marriage to someone who reminded her of her mother, and in a bad way, and being cheated on, and finding herself in a new land, like a new city, and feeling sick and tired and going through depression, and being stuck with two kids with no one around, I just think any escape would have been good. It could have been a new man. It could have been multi-level marketing. It could have been uh, moving cities and doing something different. But for her, it was the teachings of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, which her friend Jim introduced her to, and it felt right to her. And this is the 70s, the late 70s, and a lot of people were learning that their spiritual happiness and their own self actualization was the most important thing, that leaving your kids and your family was okay, that you had to follow your bliss. And so if you find a teaching and a guru who's going to tell you, I have the answers, I can make you feel better, I can teach you how to really live, and you've never really lived, you've only lived for other people, you've never experienced who you are without, this abuse or, this community, then I could see why you would get sucked into it. I mean,
Absolutely.
my mom was ripe for that.
Well, and it sounds like, when you depict in the book about her listening, to these tapes of his that, I think to you, as a child and maybe even as an adult too, sound a little bit gibberishy and
Oh my
and
gosh.
so
It's like word salad to an extent. I mean, I'm sure people who follow him, and he changed his name to Osho when he was, I don't know if you know that. He changed his name to Osho later, and before he died, and had followers under that name too. I mean, he has so many books, and I'm wondering, what did he write? I mean, some of them are just, transcribed lectures he gave, but it's just, I understand the appeal. I get it. A lot of us want someone to tell us what to do. I get it. Like,
and
believe me.
I think to up level too, and kind of like, oh, I want to reach the next step toward my own self actualization.
Yes, but I mean, think about it. Like, a lot of us are better off. I'm great when I haven't seen anyone all day. I mean, no one has gotten mad at me. I haven't made any mistakes. I'm like, great. It's when you see people and you're in relationship that the real struggle is. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing to learn how to be an amazingly, it would be like great to be a very present parent, a present person in the world, to be able to deal with all of the problems that you have without being afraid and without needing escape, and to be okay with that. Like, that would be more groundbreaking than running away and living in a bubble where you don't have to connect with your family, where you're told to stop being in touch with your family, where you're told that children are a hindrance, where you are the only one that's important. I mean, what's going to come of a society like that, right?
Right. Well, and I think too, just when you explain that about, that his followers were told to either like leave your children behind, or again, the ones who came along, which I know your mother said, that she would have liked to do at one point, to bring you and your sister along, that, these children were, not well taken care of. They were exposed to, again, people pursuing their enlightenment in very, very
Yes.
open sexual
I
ways.
mean, he was known as the sex guru. Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't realize until I was in my 40s that he was known as the sex guru, Bhagwan, because he really wanted you to just enjoy the love and the freedom in partners, and also to, just lose yourself and take care of the inner child of you, the part of you that was really sensory and like sensual. But I had no idea he was known as a sex guru, which is part of the reason I'm sure my father didn't talk that much about my mom being gone, because then he would have to talk about that and explain that. And he also would have to be in that space where his ex-wife was, potentially having all these partners and living this life, which is probably very unsettling to him.
Right, right. And so it sounds like it was really kind of more of a, hedonistic pursuit of pleasure that he was really promoting, not necessarily spiritual enlightenment?
Well, I mean, it started, if you look at the stuff, I mean, and in my book, some of it's there, but ultimately there was immigration fraud and tax evasion. There was bioterror, the largest bioterror attack on US soil. There was growing the AIDS, virus in Petri dishes in their lab, huge arsenal of, guns. I mean, everything was just kind of wiretapping, attempted poisonings. I mean, it became very nefarious when he was working with his right hand woman, Sheila, and it was just a mess. I mean, I would like to know, this is an open question to anyone watching, ever. You can come find me ever, anytime you find the answer to this. Is it possible to achieve great power and not become a megalomaniac? Is it possible to not start buying your own garbage? Because I don't know that it is.
It's really interesting that you bring that up, because I've had similar wonderings lately, that is it possible for leaders to not, like you said, to not just buy
drink their own Kool-Aid, right?
Yep, and not just to become corrupted, because there are people too that, even more in our industry, that I used to follow, and I used to think that they were great and such inspirational figures. And then, we all have our downsides, and we all have our, our secrets or our mistakes and things. And then you just kind of go, oh,
yes,
that person that I believed in, oh, they're doing this now. And you're like,
no, I really I mean, I'm dying to know more about that. We should have another conversation offline about that. But I just, you have to just expect, maybe my pessimism helps me here, but no one, I mean, I just saw so many people that my mom followed or had that she thought was, that were great, or people who seem so shiny. And I mean, there are problems everywhere, and no one has the answers. They might have they might have some of the breadcrumbs to get you on the trail, to get you to your answers, but nobody has it figured out entirely. No one does. And if they say they do, I mean, I don't know. I just think if the ego is really dangerous, and I know a lot of people are lost, and I know a lot of people want answers, and there are ways to find them about yourself that will always take a lot of work. It will always take a lot of work to live better, but it's worth it if you can do it, and you have to do it yourself. There's no quick fix.
Well, and I think even in the part of the book, and I took some screenshots, but I know I took a lot of screenshots, so I probably can't find it right now. I take way too many screenshots of everything on my phone, reading stuff.
Well, I love how closely you read my book. I mean, the questions you're asking are so intricate and really specific, and I really appreciate that.
Well, thanks. It's a great book, and it's very intriguing. It was it was a quick, I found it to be a pretty quick read, and I'm not a fast reader. But when you even mentioned just about Bhagwan, that name means God, and so you're saying like, wow, if you're essentially referencing yourself as God, like, oh boy, like this is not someone I'm comfortable.
No,
following.
I'm out. Wait, what'd you say your name is?
Themselves that right.
Your name is God? Okay, I'm gonna go.
But again, like you said, I think it is easy sometimes, just when people are looking for guidance or looking for answers, that they pin this on a leader who seems to have at least a piece of it figured out, or claims to have all of it figured out. And that sometimes when people are vulnerable, and like you said, and not, all the things that your mother had gone through, I think that's a really important point. And I can tell that in you talking about it, I think it's probably helped you build that compassion and that understanding, for your mother too.
Yeah, and also to know that I know she wouldn't do it again if given the opportunity. I mean, she's older now, she moves slower, and she says she wouldn't have done this 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It's just not something she would have done. And that helps a lot in the healing too. If I felt that if given the chance she would leave again, she would, then that would really hurt me. I have to help, it helps me a little bit to believe that, she was really young and inexperienced, and she made some poor choices. And I mentioned this a little in the book, that maybe I don't know how much she believes this or not, but she did say she didn't know that we'd be better off with her. She was worried about her anger toward us. And that was a strange thing too, because then that validated my feeling was, oh, she seems a little angry. And it wasn't just, I wasn't just making that up. Like, she was sort of like simmering, very edgy. And that's a very bad feeling to have as a kid when you're around a parent like that.
Definitely. And I think though too, when you understand that, though, when your mom shared that with you, and then forcing you to face like, oh my goodness, so we could have been, abused, physically, if we had stayed, with our mom, and just how uncomfortable it is to realize that, and that, again, it was almost, maybe in her eyes, it was more of a protective move. You're better off with your father. He can handle this better than
Yes. I mean, I think it was a convenient, yes, I think it was a convenient thing for her to say, but I also think it's true. And, I feel like it was hard growing up, and there's especially moments in the story that always will get me, not just the book, but just memories that I've had for a long time that will always be painful to think about. But I feel like I have been so lucky and blessed, in these last years as an adult. And I'm so different than what I was when I was 20 even, and chasing people, hoping they'd like me and trying to get approval everywhere. And I still have the approval bug, as I mentioned before, but I mean, I'm so different than what I was. And whatever hardship I had, and sadnesses I had, I'm not happy I had them, but they help build who I am, and they do inform my relationships now, and hopefully help inform my teaching and the podcast, and just trying to be a better listener, and to know that, like, everyone has stuff that they're dealing with, and that at least has gone to this place where I can have a life as an adult, knock wood, that's pretty good. Like, I feel very grateful for that.
Would you say that having written this book has been a healing experience for you?
Definitely.
Definitely.
Definitely. And I didn't go into it for that, but it definitely has. And also, it's been healing to hear from readers and interviewers, like you, to hear what you've taken from it. And I have been, people have reached out to say, this reminds me of something I went through, and thank you for writing this, or people who say, I feel like I should write my story, and even people who, like, understand the story a little bit more complex, in a more complex way. That is a beautiful thing, to people who have found me and said, my parent followed Bhagwan, thank you or my parent left, thank you so much. Like, it, that is very helpful to me as a person. Like, I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm sure that's really gratifying to get that feedback, that, again, helps you feel like that in writing this, you've helped you've helped other people.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't set out to do that, right? But it's a beautiful gift at this stage of having the book out. It's just lovely. And I've had a really nice, I mean, even though it's been COVID, even though it's a small press, and even though, I'm a debut author and stuff, I mean, I just have had the best experience, and I'm so grateful for the readers, and just for the way the book has landed. I'm really happy about that.
That's great. That's great. I'm so happy for you on that. And again, I think the book is so great. I think you did such a wonderful job with it. And I hope that, that it really gets out there more, and people can, go grab it. I've been sharing the link here throughout on Amazon, and I know it's still $3.99 on Kindle right now. So
yes, I know, it's a bargain
to go pick.
Yeah, and I should also mention, if you're one of those busy people, like we all are, and you prefer to listen to the book, I narrated the book. So if during this interview my voice hasn't driven you nuts, you can get the audiobook, which I narrated. It runs about 6 hours, and so it's not an epic thing. And if you're someone who enjoys audiobooks, then go ahead and get that, because I've heard people are receiving that pretty well too.
Well, and I love authors reading in their own voices. I think that is so great, because then you get that intonation, that they have, the emphasis on certain words or certain, things, and just hearing their voice, it's getting to experience a writer's voice in another way.
Like, so. I know Trevor Noah's book, that one, Born a Crime, was so wonderful to hear him narrate that. Yeah.
Nice. So let's talk just a little bit more about the podcast. So I know that's kind of like a whole other thing, but tell us about your podcast.
I usually have my little like placard so I can show it, but it's basically a very yellow logo. You can find it anywhere. It's called And Then Everything Changed. I have this like bright orange book cover, this bright yellow like podcast. You cannot miss me. But it's called And Then Everything Changed. And I've been doing the podcast for almost 2 years now. And I'm nearing my 100th episode. And I've had authors like Mikkel Jolet, who wrote Hollywood Park, and Erica C. Barnett, who wrote Quitter. And Joanna Rakoff just came on. She wrote My Salinger Year. And Allison Hong Merrill, whose 99 Fire Hoops is coming out. She was just on. That's going to air soon. And also Laura Davis, who wrote The Courage to Heal, she's coming on. So all those authors, but I've also had people who are social justice advocates, not just authors, and also people in recovery. I basically interview people about the pivotal moments in their life and the decisions that they kind of home in on that have defined them. And my idea had started with the book idea or screenplay idea, which is where, there's this point of, there's this inciting incident that happens, and then the protagonist or the main character has to go through this sort of journey because this thing happens. And so how do they get around the thing or come to the end and find their way? And so that's kind of what the interviews are. And some interviews are about a half hour, some are 45 minutes, and it's, you can find it wherever you get your podcast. And it's been really lovely to talk to so many people. I've had guests from Italy and Uganda. I've had, I did a COVID series when COVID first came out, and I interviewed people all over the place, and that was really fun. And so I love doing it. And you can find it wherever you get podcasts.
That's awesome. I think that is such an interesting idea for a podcast and, a show to talk to people about those inciting incidents in their lives, that everything was different.
Yeah. Well, because I think
that's such a great literary life.
Well, yeah, I think that, I feel also that when we're living our lives, we don't realize when we're in progress of our lives, like we don't know, oh, this is big. This is going to be big. I mean, it might feel big sometimes, but it's not until later on, like the bird's eye view, that you realize, holy moly, like after that point, everything was different. And so I like to organize lives a little bit like that because I do like structure. And so it's a very loose structure, but it is the inspiration for the show. And I love doing it. So, and most of those interviews are heavy on the guest talking, not me. Like I've talked more today with you than I usually do in the interviews. The interview is mostly about the spotlight on my guest.
Right. That's how I feel too, is I feel like I don't really want to talk too much. I just want to be able to, give the right questions and feedback to, to
well, you're such a good interviewer.
So, oh, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
you're such a great guest.
Oh, I feel like we're just like hanging out, and we're just like having a really cozy time together.
Well, and that's really the vibe that I would like, for this show, is to be able to be like, you're just eavesdropping on us, having coffee in a cafe and talking about your book and learning more about you. So is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I guess the only thing I would say is, if you want to read more of my work, if you want to read articles I've written about writing, if you want to find my podcast or anything, you can find me at Ronit Plank everywhere. I just use my name. So it's my name, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. I have a website, and on the website, you'll find my newsletter you can sign up for if you want. I only send it once a month. I try not to bombard people. There's upcoming appearances on that, and also podcast episodes and all kinds of things. The book is there, and I have an audio book sample of the book there for free. You can just listen to a couple of chapters, and then if you like it, you can go get it. So find me, connect with me, reach out. I'd love to connect, and I'm on Instagram every day. I have to admit, I'm there every day. I just wrote an article on social media, so I grew very accustomed to it. But yeah, come find me. And if you want to know about my new book, like, you can definitely sign up for the newsletter, and I'll have the cover reveal soon. And that's a very compact short story collection too. So it's not, epic, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. Are you able to share the title?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I should have. It's called Home is a Made Up Place.
Okay. I feel like I've heard that already. Is it already?
I may have mentioned it. I may have put it in like my bio. You probably heard it from my bio. Okay. But I'm dying to get the cover sketches from the artist and see what he made of it, and start that process, because that's supposed to come out, I think, in early spring, which is going to be here before we know it.
I'm excited about that too. I would definitely like to check that out.
Oh, I would love you to read it.
And it would be fun to have you back to talk.
I would love to come. And, I won an award for that for women over 40 who are writers. So I
awesome.
was in the middle of getting this book writing when I got the news that I had won the Eludia Award. And I was like, what? I was like, this year can't get any better in a really hard year. So yeah, I would love to send you a copy, actually my gift when I have it. So.
Oh yeah, I would totally love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thanks so much just for being here today and, sharing your experience and your book with us. And again, I think it's really brave for you to, put your childhood story and your life story out there in such a way that is so open and so vulnerable to people.
Well, I've been very, very happy with the reaction, and I'm glad it hasn't been a painful reception. It's been a reception that's made me feel happy that I did it. And so thank goodness. And, I really appreciate your appreciation of the book.
Yeah. Well, you're so welcome. And again, just so thrilled to have you. And I wish you all the success with When She Comes Back. If you haven't gotten it yet, go get it. And yes, you can then keep up with Ronit on all the ways that she mentioned. She's always on Instagram. So you're 24/7 on Instagram. But thank you so much, Ronit.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Bye. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks. See you next week.